My friends, there are certain truths the enemy does not want you to know, because if you knew them, you would become unstoppable in the spirit. The Bible tells us in Hosea, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." Ignorance is the breeding ground for bondage. And one of the ways witches, sorcerers, and agents of darkness gain access to people is through what they eat and drink. Food is more than taste, more than culture, more than appetite. It is a spiritual covenant in disguise. When God created Adam, He gave him the power to eat and not to eat. That was not a small matter. It was destiny on a plate. The serpent knew that if he could manipulate appetite, he could manipulate authority. And the first battle for man's soul was fought over food. Don't you see? Food is never neutral. What enters your mouth has the power to either sharpen your spiritual senses or blind them completely. Witches understand what many believers ignore. They know food can become a gateway. They know meals can become altars. They know that once something enters your body, it becomes part of your bloodstream, your soul's atmosphere, your spiritual sensitivity. That is why in many cultures, demonic rituals always involve food and drink. They sacrifice it, they enchant it, they offer it, then they serve it. And once you eat it, you carry the covenant of the altar it came from. There are foods they use to block your spiritual eyes, so you can no longer discern dreams, visions, or revelations. There are drinks they enchant, so your ears become deaf to the voice of God. So you confuse truth with lies, light with darkness. And this is why many people pray, but still remain spiritually blind, because they have eaten something that silences their discernment. Beloved, pay attention. Not every meal is for your stomach. Not every invitation to eat is an invitation of love. Sometimes it is an invitation to bondage. That is why the Bible warns us, do not be ignorant of the enemy's devices. Have you noticed that after certain meals you cannot pray? After certain drinks, your dreams are polluted. After eating in some houses, confusion, lust, or heaviness follows you. That is not coincidence. That is witchcraft at work through food. Guard your appetite, because appetite is one of the easiest doors to your spirit. Witches know that if they cannot attack you openly, they will poison you secretly, not with physical poison, but with spiritual contamination. They will serve you food dedicated to idols, seasoned with spells, cooked with curses, disguised as kindness. And once you eat it, your spirit becomes heavy, your discernment becomes dull, and your destiny becomes delayed. That is why Jesus taught us to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." He was not only speaking of physical food, but sanctified food. Food blessed, consecrated, protected by the Father. That is why Paul told Timothy to sanctify every meal with prayer and thanksgiving, for it becomes holy when received in faith. Prayer over your food is not tradition, it is warfare. You are declaring, this bread will not carry witchcraft, this drink will not carry curses, this meal will not carry blindness. My friend, hear me. The devil is not after your stomach, he is after your sight, your ears, your spiritual authority. And if he can block your eyes through food, he can keep you from seeing visions. If he can block your ears through drink, he can keep you from hearing instruction. If he can pollute your appetite, he can pollute your destiny. So beware of the food you accept, the tables you sit at, the drinks you consume. Test the spirit behind the invitation. Pray before you eat. Bless your meals. Cover your table with the blood of Jesus. Because food can be a doorway, but it can also be a weapon of victory when sanctified by God. I tell you today, guard your appetite, for your spiritual eyes and ears depend on it. And when you look closely through Scripture, you will see that almost every turning point in human history involved food. Esau sold his birthright over a plate of stew. Israel lusted after the garlic, onions, and cucumbers of Egypt, and it blinded them to the milk and honey of Canaan. Even in the New Testament, Paul warned the Corinthians about food offered to idols. Why? Because food is spiritual transaction. It is an exchange of power, an exchange of covenant, an exchange of identity. Witches know this. They know that the stomach is not just an organ, it is an altar. And if they can control what goes into your stomach, they can write covenants over your life without your permission. You thought you were only eating bread, but they were writing blindness into your spirit. You thought you were only drinking wine, but they were sealing your ears from divine instruction. You thought you were sharing a meal, but you were sharing in their altar. That is why the enemy fights fasting so much, because fasting breaks the manipulation of food. Fasting disconnects you from demonic appetites. Fasting clears your spiritual eyes and unblocks your ears. When you stop feeding the body, your spirit begins to breathe again. That is why when Daniel refused the king's food, his wisdom was 10 times sharper, his visions were clear, his interpretations accurate. He understood that food is never just food, food is destiny. How many people today have traded their spiritual clarity for a taste of enchanted delicacies? How many have lost discernment because they kept accepting every plate placed before them? That is why discernment is not just about people's words, it is also about people's kitchens. Who cooked this? Whose altar was this offered to? Whose hands prepared this meal? These are not paranoid questions, these are protective questions. Because one wrong meal can derail your spirit for months. Think about it, why do witches and sorcerers hold midnight feasts? Why do they eat flesh and drink blood in their rituals? Because they know eating is covenant. They know drinking is agreement. They know ingestion is possession. And if they can feed you in the physical or the spiritual, they can bind you. That is why many people wake up tired after eating in their dreams. It was not a dream. It was a spiritual meal designed to blind their eyes and deafen their ears. And so many believers laugh it off, saying, it was only food. But in the spirit realm, nothing is only food. It is either consecrated or contaminated. It is either sanctified or sacrificed. This is why Paul declared, whether you eat or drink, do all to the glory of God. Because eating can glorify God, or it can glorify idols. Drinking can honor the spirit, or it can bind you to witchcraft. When you pray over your food, you are not performing a ritual. You are breaking a ritual. You are not reciting a tradition. You are interrupting an altar. You are declaring that whatever has been attached to this plate must bow to the authority of Christ. You are cleansing your table from hidden enchantments. You are cutting off every hand of darkness that tried to manipulate your appetite. There are foods specifically targeted to cloud your mind, to dull your hearing, to confuse your dreams. That is why after certain meals, you cannot understand scripture. After certain drinks, your sleep is filled with demonic images. After eating with certain people, your day is filled with heaviness and confusion. These are not natural occurrences. They are strategic witchcraft attacks delivered on a spoon or in a cup. The enemy knows that a blinded prophet is no threat. A deaf intercessor is no danger. A dulled watchman is easy prey. So he uses food as his weapon of choice. He uses appetite as his tool of warfare. He uses meals as his invisible chains. And many sit at tables thinking they are eating friendship, while in truth they are eating manipulation. That is why some invitations to eat are not invitations of fellowship, but invitations into bondage. There are men and women who have sat at the wrong table and afterwards could not pray again with the same fire. There are believers who have eaten the wrong food and suddenly their dreams stopped. Their visions vanished. Their ears became deaf to the whispers of the Spirit. It was not natural, it was orchestrated. It was the enemy using food as a weapon to shut down spiritual perception. In the Old Testament, Balaam could not curse Israel directly. So he taught Balak another strategy: send them food, seduce them with meals connected to idolatry, and once they eat, they will lose their covering. And the same strategy repeats itself today. When witches cannot fight you openly, they feed you secretly. They cook spells into stews. They mix enchantments into drinks. They attach covenants to bread. And the one who eats unknowingly signs with his own appetite. There is a reason why Jesus broke bread with his disciples as covenant. He was teaching us that food is covenantal. He took bread, blessed it, and said, "This is my body." He took the cup and said, "This is my blood." Bread and wine became symbols of the greatest covenant in history. If food can establish covenant with God, then food can also establish covenant with darkness. That is why witches prefer to feed you than to fight you, because once you eat, you agree. Many of you listening have had strange experiences after meals you could not explain. Sudden confusion, nightmares, a heaviness you could not shake, dreams filled with serpents, dogs, or strange figures. That was not ordinary indigestion. It was spiritual interference. The food was carrying more than calories, it was carrying covenants. And because you did not discern it, your spirit became entangled. This is why spiritual maturity demands control over appetite. Because appetite has always been the weakness of men. Appetite pulled Adam out of Eden. Appetite sold Esau's inheritance. Appetite trapped Israel in the wilderness. Appetite blinded Samson until he could not see anymore. Appetite is the backdoor witches love to use. Because a man without control over his appetite will never have control over his destiny. And when you sleep and find yourself eating in dreams, understand that this is also a tactic of the enemy. It is an invisible banquet designed to silence your discernment. Many believers wake from such dreams feeling weak, drained, and spiritually disconnected. Why? Because their spiritual eyes have been coated with darkness through food. Their spiritual ears have been blocked with enchantments through drink. That is why prayer after such dreams is not optional. It is mandatory. The enemy's goal is to contaminate the vessel so that revelation cannot flow. If your eyes are covered, you will not see visions. If your ears are blocked, you will not hear direction. If your spirit is heavy, you will not discern danger. And when a man cannot see or hear in the spirit, he walks blindly into traps. That is why witches target your plate. They are targeting your perception. And I tell you this, the table of a man reveals his altar. Look at the food that is served to you and ask, whose altar has this been connected to? Because in the realm of the spirit, every meal is tied to a source. Some tables are blessed, carrying the fragrance of heaven, releasing peace, joy, and clarity of mind. Other tables are cursed, carrying the smoke of strange fire, releasing confusion, bondage, and spiritual blindness. And when you sit down without discernment, you open your spirit to whatever altar empowered that meal. Do you remember Elijah under the broom tree? The angel of the Lord touched him and said, "Arise and eat." And when he ate heaven's food, he was strengthened for 40 days and nights. That was not ordinary bread. That was angelic provision. Heaven used food to empower his spirit for the journey ahead. If heaven can empower through food, then hell can also weaken through food. If angels can serve meals to strengthen prophets, then witches can serve meals to weaken believers. This is why the enemy loves to hide behind hospitality. He knows you will accept food quicker than you will accept an open curse. He knows you will swallow enchantments faster when they are disguised as kindness. He knows you will not resist a poisoned plate if it comes with a smiling face. And so many believers have been trapped because they equated every invitation with love, not knowing that love is not always the spirit behind the meal. Pay attention to the change in your atmosphere after eating with someone. Pay attention to the shift in your dreams after drinking what was offered to you. Pay attention to the sudden inability to pray, the cloudiness of mind, the heaviness in your body. These are not accidents. They are symptoms of spiritual tampering. They are signals that food has been used as a channel to block your eyes and ears. The devil is strategic. He knows that if he can dull your eyes, you will not see the traps he lays. He knows that if he can deafen your ears, you will not hear the Spirit's warnings. He knows that if he can cloud your discernment, you will embrace your enemies as friends and push away your helpers as foes. And so he goes after your appetite, because appetite is the gate to authority. Even Paul warned that in the last days, people would follow doctrines of demons connected to what they eat and drink. The manipulation of appetite is one of the oldest tricks of hell. That is why idolatry is always connected to feasts. That is why pagan temples were filled with food offered to demons. That is why witches today still dedicate meals, still cook with rituals, still use herbs not only for flavor but for sorcery. Many who think they are battling laziness, prayerlessness, or mental fog are actually battling what they consumed. Their spirit is fighting contamination. Their mind is resisting bewitchment. Their soul is struggling against what entered through the gate of appetite. And until they discern it, they will keep praying, but never breaking through. Because breakthrough is not just about what you say in prayer, it is also about what you allow in your mouth. This is why sanctification is not just about avoiding sin. It is also about guarding appetite. You sanctify your meals because you know the enemy plays with plates. You consecrate your table because you know not all bread is innocent. You fast because you know abstinence resets your discernment. Fasting is proof that food is more than survival, it is spiritual alignment. When you fast, you declare, "My stomach will not control my spirit. My appetite will not blind my eyes. My taste will not block my ears." And have you noticed how Jesus, after fasting 40 days, was tempted first with food? The devil said, "Turn these stones into bread." The devil did not tempt him first with lust or power. He tempted him with food, because food is the foundation of appetite, and appetite is the foundation of dominion. Whoever controls your appetite controls your destiny. That is why witches go there first. That is why they use food to seduce, food to weaken, food to block, food to bind. Think about Daniel in Babylon. The king wanted him and the other young men to eat from the royal table, food sacrificed to idols, food polluted by strange gods. But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's delicacies. He understood something many overlook, that food has power to defile. He knew that what entered his mouth could cloud his spirit and contaminate his covenant with God. And because he resisted, his vision was sharp, his wisdom 10 times greater, and his discernment unmatched. The refusal of contaminated food preserved his destiny. Now compare that with Esau, who sold his birthright for a bowl of stew. He ate, and in eating, he lost. His appetite blinded him to the value of his inheritance. This is how the enemy works. He uses food to exchange destinies. He uses meals to trade glory for shame, power for weakness, vision for blindness. He hides covenants inside appetites so that when you swallow, you are not just feeding your body, you are bargaining your future. This is why Jesus warned his disciples to be careful of the leaven of the Pharisees. Leaven was bread, food, but symbolically it meant teachings, ideologies, spiritual toxins that entered through the ear and the mouth. He was saying what you consume can poison your spirit. What you eat, both physically and spiritually, can block your eyes and ears. Beloved, when you notice that every time you eat with certain people, heaviness follows you, that is not ordinary. When every time you drink something from certain hands, confusion swallows your clarity, that is not natural. When you dream constantly of eating at strange tables, and afterwards you cannot remember your prayers, that is not coincidence. These are indicators that the enemy is using food as a weapon. And it is not only physical meals. There are also cultural foods, traditional drinks, ceremonial plates used in family rituals that carry ancestral covenants. Many eat them without discernment and wonder why cycles of bondage never end. Those meals were not mere celebrations. They were sacrifices disguised as tradition. Eating them bound your spirit to altars erected long before you were born. That is why liberation sometimes begins with repentance over what has been consumed. Look at how Jezebel fed her prophets at her table. They ate daily, and in eating, they became bound to her spirit. They prophesied what she wanted, not what God said. Why? Because the food of her table was not neutral. It carried her influence. Whoever feeds you controls you. Whoever sustains your appetite sustains your allegiance. This is why spiritual blindness often begins at the table. And when Elijah confronted those prophets on Mount Carmel, he was not just confronting their words, he was confronting the altar that fed them. He knew that their blindness was not just ignorance, it was appetite manipulation. Their ears were deaf because their food was enchanted. Their eyes were blind because their table was cursed. And unless the altar changed, their perception could never change. This is why you must pray not only over yourself, but over your table, over your kitchen, over your family meals. Because the enemy knows if he can feed your children polluted food, he can block their spiritual growth before they even begin. He knows if he can contaminate your household's appetite, He can silence the prophetic destinies in your lineage. The fight is not only in the church, it is also in the kitchen. And remember Joseph in Egypt, when his brothers sat to eat bread after throwing him into the pit. They ate with no awareness that food can numb the conscience. Their appetite silenced their compassion, blinded their eyes, deafened their ears. That meal was not just bread. It was a symbol of how appetite can dull spiritual sensitivity. Even today, many sit at tables eating with hearts blind to justice, deaf to truth, and unaware of the spiritual blindness overtaking them. Look at the wilderness generation. God gave them manna, bread from heaven, pure and holy, designed to keep their eyes on Him. Yet they lusted after the food of Egypt. They cried for meat, garlic, cucumbers, and onions. Their longing for corrupted food blinded them to the glory that surrounded them. They had the food of angels but still wanted the food of slaves. Appetite blinded them to destiny, and witches exploit that same weakness, offering you delicacies designed to pull you backward when God is trying to move you forward. Even the prodigal son, when he strayed from his father's house, found himself desiring the food of pigs. His appetite had fallen so low that he could no longer discern his true identity. Appetite is a mirror of your spiritual state. When witches feed you contaminated food, they are not just filling your stomach, they are lowering your identity, bringing you into fellowship with pigs, with idols, with darkness. And what about Eve in the garden? The fruit was pleasing to the eye, desirable to eat, but it blinded her to the voice of God. Appetite blinded her judgment. Appetite opened the door to deception. The serpent knew the power of food. He knew that if he could win the appetite, he could win the spirit. That same deception is alive today, except now it is not just one fruit in a garden. It is meals enchanted, drinks bewitched, foods dedicated to altars, designed to dull the eyes and close the ears of believers. This is why Jesus, after his resurrection, revealed himself to his disciples in the breaking of bread. Their eyes were opened as he gave them food. Notice, eyes opened at the table. What does this tell us? That the table can be a place of blindness or a place of revelation. It depends on the altar behind the food. Heaven's bread opens eyes. Hell's bread blinds them. The early church understood this so well that they devoted themselves to the breaking of bread with prayer and thanksgiving. They did not eat casually. They sanctified every meal. They knew that the table was a place of covenant. They knew that eating together could either invite the Spirit or invite strange spirits. They guarded their tables with prayer because they understood the unseen battle connected to appetite. Witches fear disciplined believers who control their appetites. Because a man who can say no to food is a man who can say no to sin. A woman who can fast is a woman who can see clearly in visions. A family that sanctifies their meals is a family whose table becomes an altar of fire, untouchable by darkness. The devil trembles at such households because he knows his tactic of enchanted food cannot work there. Do you see now why fasting and prayer walk hand in hand? Do you see why sanctification must touch even your kitchen? Do you see why discernment must include your appetite? The devil does not need to fight you in your dreams if he can control you in your meals. He does not need to curse you openly if he can contaminate you secretly. He does not need to blind you directly if he can feed you darkness indirectly. This is why Paul said, "I discipline my body and bring it under subjection." He was not only talking about avoiding sin, he was also speaking of appetite. Because appetite is a gate, and if you do not master it, something else will. Witches count on undisciplined appetites. They count on careless believers who never pray over food, who accept every plate, who laugh off every dream of eating. They count on your negligence, because negligence is permission in the spirit. And if you look carefully, you will notice how appetite is always attacked before major destiny moments. Before Moses received the 10 Commandments, he fasted 40 days. Before Elijah called down fire, he repaired the altar and rejected Jezebel's food. Before Jesus began his ministry, he conquered appetite in the wilderness. Before the apostles received Pentecost, they were praying and fasting. Appetite must be conquered before authority can be released. That is why witches try to reintroduce bondage through food. In Acts, Paul warned the Corinthians about eating food sacrificed to idols. He knew that idols are nothing, but the food carried covenants. Eating was not just eating, it was fellowship with demons. And he warned that you cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot sit at two tables and expect your spirit to stay clear. Tables are spiritual battlegrounds, and appetite is the weapon. Many of you wonder why your ears cannot discern the voice of God anymore. You wonder why your dreams are blurred, your visions empty, your discernment weak. And yet, if you trace it, you will see it often started at the table, after that dinner party, after that family feast, after that casual drink, something shifted. Your prayer life went down, your spiritual eyes dimmed, your ears dulled. It was not just coincidence. It was a spiritual exchange sealed by food. Look again at Revelation. The Spirit rebukes the church of Pergamum for eating food sacrificed to idols. The complaint was not about sin in general. It was about appetite. Because appetite links you to altars. Appetite joins you to covenants. Appetite blinds your perception of truth. That church was in danger not because they were weak in prayer, but because they were careless in appetite. And if the enemy cannot feed you physically, he will try to feed you in dreams. He knows that the spirit receives what it eats. He knows that eating in the dream is agreement. He knows that if you swallow it, your spirit will be bound. That is why after eating in dreams, people wake up weak, heavy, and spiritually disoriented. It was not an ordinary dream meal. It was an altar feeding your soul to blind your eyes and block your ears. What many call tradition is often witchcraft in disguise. Foods cooked for ancestral celebrations, drinks poured out at family gatherings, meals prepared in ceremonies, all these can carry covenants. And when you eat them without discernment, you inherit battles that do not belong to you. You take into yourself burdens that were never meant to be yours. That is why the cycle of blindness, poverty, confusion, and delay continues in families. The food of tradition carried the curses of ancestors. This is why discernment must guide your appetite. This is why prayer must cover your meals. This is why fasting must cleanse your system. Because witches are strategic. They will not always curse you directly. Sometimes they will simply serve you a plate. And look closely at how the enemy operates. He never presents food as dangerous. He presents it as desirable. Eve saw the fruit and said it was pleasant to the eyes and good for food. That's how deception enters, through beauty, through taste, through what looks harmless. Witches know this. They won't bring you food that repels you. They will bring you what you crave, what your flesh desires, what your appetite has been whispering for in secret. They study your hunger so they can poison it with precision. This is why control over appetite is proof of spiritual maturity. A man who cannot say no to his stomach will not be able to say no to temptation. A woman who cannot discern what she eats will not be able to discern what she hears. The eyes and the ears of the Spirit are connected to the appetite of the flesh. That is why fasting sharpens your eyes. It starves the flesh to feed the Spirit. That is why sanctified meals protect your ears. They silence demonic whispers that ride on contaminated food. Have you not noticed that when Elijah ate the angel's food, his strength carried him for 40 days? That was more than calories. That was covenantal energy. Have you not noticed that when Jesus broke bread with the disciples in Emmaus, their eyes opened immediately? The breaking of bread opened their perception. Have you not noticed that when Israel ate manna, they were sustained supernaturally? Heaven fed them with clarity, not confusion. If God uses food to open eyes, then the enemy uses food to close them. And when witches target a man of prayer, they know they cannot silence his mouth, but they can dull his spirit. They invite him to eat, they feed him in dreams, they contaminate his appetite. Slowly his fire dims, his visions dry up, his ears no longer catch the whisper of heaven. It wasn't that his prayers were powerless, it was that his appetite had been captured. A captured appetite equals a captured destiny. The truth is, every table is an altar. When you sit to eat, you are not just filling your stomach, you are communing with an altar. The question is, which altar? Some tables are altars of blessing, others are altars of bondage. Some meals are consecrated, others are contaminated. Some drinks refresh the spirit, others bind the soul. If you don't ask the right questions, you will eat yourself into blindness and drink yourself into deafness. This is why the early apostles said, "We will give ourselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word." Because they knew that without prayer, even food can become a trap. Without discernment, even a cup can carry a covenant. They sanctified everything because they understood everything can carry spirit. Even today, many people are fighting battles that began at a table. Strange sickness that doctors cannot diagnose. Confusion of mind that no medication can cure. Nightmares that no counseling can explain. It all began with a plate offered in friendliness, but laced with enchantment. It began with a drink offered in celebration, but dedicated to idols. It began with food accepted without prayer. And this is why some of you have noticed that after eating at certain family gatherings, your dreams shift. Suddenly you start seeing shadows, animals chasing you, dead relatives speaking to you. That is not nostalgia. It is witchcraft using food as a portal. The meal you ate was a key that unlocked old ancestral covenants, pulling your spirit into altars you thought were broken. They don't always need to sacrifice you, they just need you to eat with them. Because once you eat, you participate. This is why Paul said in Corinthians, "You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons." He was showing us the reality of two tables, two cups, two covenants, two destinies. Eating and drinking are never neutral. They tie you to a source. If the source is God, you gain clarity, strength, revelation. If the source is demonic, you lose sight, you lose hearing, you lose authority. And remember Nehemiah, when his enemies tried to distract him from rebuilding the wall, they invited him to come down, to sit, to eat, to discuss. But he refused because he knew their table was a trap. Witches still use the same method. They invite you to sit and eat, but the table is really a snare. They don't need you to sin openly. They just need you to accept food from the wrong altar. That one act can drain your spiritual fire. Have you also noticed that when you fast, your dreams become sharper? Suddenly you start hearing God's voice with clarity. Scriptures open up to you, your eyes see deeper. Why? Because appetite has been dethroned. The fog of food has lifted. The noise of contaminated appetite has been silenced. That's why witches hate fasting believers. Because fasting breaks the enchantment of food. It cleanses your spiritual eyes and reopens your ears. Many of you have been under subtle attack, thinking it is laziness or weakness, but the root has been food. Every time you visit certain relatives, you come back heavy. Every time you eat at certain houses, you can't pray. Every time you drink certain offerings, confusion swallows you. This is not natural. It is spiritual manipulation through appetite. And until you recognize it, you will keep walking in cycles of blindness. Even kings in the Bible knew that tables were spiritual. That's why Pharaoh controlled what Joseph's brothers ate. That's why Nebuchadnezzar tried to control Daniel's diet. That's why Jezebel fed her prophets. Because whoever controls your table controls your perception. Whoever controls your appetite controls your allegiance. And witches today operate with that ancient wisdom. And so, beloved, you cannot be careless. You cannot treat meals as casual. You cannot walk into every table, eat everything offered, drink everything poured. You must ask, you must discern, you must sanctify. Because your destiny is too precious to be bargained through appetite. Your sight is too valuable to be blinded by stew. Your hearing is too critical to be deafened by wine. And think of Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived. Yet even he was led astray through appetite. Not only for women, but for the delicacies of foreign nations, the feasts tied to their gods. His appetite for what was not consecrated opened the door for altars of darkness to be built in Israel. If the wisest king could be trapped by appetite, how much more must we guard our own tables? Appetite is not small, it is destiny. Look again at Jesus during his ministry. Notice how often he used meals to teach, to reveal, to covenant. He multiplied bread and fish to feed the multitude, showing that heaven can sanctify food and turn it into abundance. He dined with sinners not just for fellowship, but to reveal the kingdom breaking into their blindness. He took bread and wine and turned them into a covenant of life. He was demonstrating over and over that meals are never ordinary. They are moments of revelation, of covenant, of destiny. And the enemy counterfeits the same principle, using food not to open but to close, not to reveal but to conceal, not to covenant with God but to covenant with darkness. Have you noticed how often strange heaviness comes after eating late at night? It is not always indigestion, it is often spiritual interference. Witches love the night because at night appetites are weaker, prayer is lighter, and discernment is dull. They send food in dreams, they project meals into your sleep, and you wake up carrying burdens you did not invite. The dream meal was not random, it was a spiritual transaction. And how many children have been captured because their appetites were never sanctified? Sweets, treats, food offered innocently, but carrying invisible chains. Parents laugh, but in the spirit realm, appetites are being trained. A child who eats without prayer grows into an adult who accepts without discernment. That is why entire lineages remain blind, their ears shut, because appetite has been unguarded for generations. Look also at cultural feasts. How many festivals look colorful on the surface but are rooted in blood sacrifices, ancestral dedications, foods cooked on altars? People celebrate, but in the spirit their eyes are darkened. Their ears are deafened. Their discernment is exchanged for bondage. These are not harmless traditions. They are meals of manipulation. And unless they are broken, the blindness continues. Even nations are bound by what they eat. When Israel demanded meat in the wilderness, God gave them quail until it became poison. Their appetite killed them. An entire generation perished, not because of swords or armies, but because of unrestrained appetite. And witches still ride on that weakness today. They don't need to send armies against you. They just need to send a plate. The truth is, the greatest wars of the Spirit are not always fought in the heavens. They are fought at the table. Because the table is where covenant is sealed, where altars are accessed, where appetites decide destinies. If you win at the table, you will see clearly in the Spirit. If you lose at the table, your eyes will dim, your ears will close, and your discernment will wither. Beloved, do not underestimate the power of a meal. Food is not just nourishment, it is covenant. The enemy has always known that if he can control your appetite, he can control your vision, your hearing, and your destiny. That is why witches target your table, your dreams, your feasts. But hear me, you are not powerless. Every plate can become an altar of God when you sanctify it in the name of Jesus. Every appetite can become a weapon of righteousness when it is submitted to the Spirit. You must rise and guard your table. Refuse to eat blindly. Refuse to accept every plate placed before you. Pray over your food. Break covenants formed in dreams. Keep your appetite disciplined. For the same way Adam lost a kingdom through eating, Christ restored the kingdom by breaking bread. Your table is not ordinary, it is destiny. So from this day, let no witch blind you through appetite. Let no hidden hand close your ears with poisoned feasts. Stand in authority and declare, my table belongs to the Lord. My appetite belongs to the Lord. My covenant belongs to the Lord. And as you do, your eyes will open, your ears will awaken, and your spirit will discern with clarity. Guard your appetite, and you will guard your destiny. Protect your table, and you will protect your covenant. For witches may work through food, but God has given you the power to turn every meal into a weapon of victory.